I suppose. Thus spake the Reverend I.M. Jolly in the famous Only an Excuse on Scottish television on Hogmanay, seeking to convey the Presbyterian dismal hatred of enjoyment. That's a bit like I felt at New Year.
Yes.
Steve. Not least because I discovered that the Hootenanny we were watching with Jules Holland and all kinds of chanters and dancers and performers was pre-recorded.
Was it?
So their
I didn't know
New
that.
Year bonhomie was entirely false. And I learned that at about 10 minutes to midnight. So even if I was not of the Reverend I.M. Jolly's bent, which I am, in fact, as a lifelong non-drinker, the New Year is like a canyon of horror to me. At least it was when I was forced to meet other people around that time. But as I sat there with my small family, drinking tea, watching Jules Holland, and I then learned that it was entirely fake.
How
that
disappointing.
Is astonishing.
Oh, no.
Now, you also are in a non-drinking household.
Yes.
How did you bring in the new year?
We did it. Capitalist con. It's an absolute rip-off. I hate New Year. Because I used to work as a hotel manager, my past sort of decade of Christmases and New Years up until sort of 2013 were spent working. So I was always instigating other people's enjoyment and fun. But I'm not a fan of New Year. We sort of flicked on the BBC, watched the appalling £3.2 million of Greater London Authority money go up in smoke with
Not
the fireworks.
quite in smoke. It went up in a EU flag.
The conspiracy of that, my goodness. I should have written an article, yes. So yes, the EU flag going up. We just watched that and kind of... But we were talking about this off air, and I'm going to repeat it for our viewers. There's a very interesting background to New Year's, in so much that up until 1752 in this country, the New Year was celebrated on March the 25th. Because...
I'm totally amazed at that.
Yeah,
What was the
true
reason?
story. Because the Pope, whoever in the 1500s introduced a Gregorian calendar across Europe, obviously from the Catholic Church. Obviously we were not under the Catholic Church at the time, it was a Protestant country by then. And we didn't implement this calendar until 1752. So therefore we were running on an old calendar which had New Year as March the 25th, because we changed the date to fit into the Christian, the Easter period as it was then. What was interesting was that when they introduced in 1752, mass civil unrest occurred because the old calendar was based on the lunar cycle, not the solar cycle. Therefore, when they switched to the Gregorian calendar, which is the solar cycle, if you like, there were 11 more working days in the year. Very interesting. So was it a industrial revolution sort of move to get more working days out of the people? It was quite interesting.
Even Jeremy Corbyn's not offering 11 new days holidays. He's only offering 4.
Yeah, Corbyn, if you're watching, there we go. Change first pledge for a Labour government. Change back to a lunar calendar.
Return to the lunar calendar, or lunacy, as it might otherwise be known. Speaking of lunacy, what did you make of the scenes outside the House of Commons yesterday?
Yeah.
I'm quite ambivalent about them. I've no doubt that I would despise the individuals doing the screaming and shouting. None at all. I've equally no doubt that I despise Anna Soubry and like Owen Jones only a little bit more. At the same time, as someone who was 4.5 years ago now, quite savagely assaulted for my political beliefs, left in a hospital bed, I know what political violence feels like, and it's extremely painful. Now, they didn't come across any actual violence, although assault doesn't have to involve an actual blow. But they were being screamed at in a very ugly way. And therefore, it's my view, I'm not trying to be St. Francis of Assisi here, but though I don't like Jones very much, and I actually hate Anna Soubry, I hate what happened to them yesterday, because I know how close that is from an actual full-blown attack.
Yeah.
There are a number of ironies, though. They're all complaining about why there were no police around to come to their aid, to which the whole of Britain said, yeah, tell us about it.
Yeah.
Because with 21,000 police officers down across the country, this is the norm for most people. There's a trouble looming or a burglary in progress, call the police and you'll have to wait quite some time before they arrive. Yeah. So that's one irony. The second irony is that Anna Soubry herself has helped over the last years generate some of the poisonous character of public discourse that exists in this country. Yeah. But my third observation would be, they ain't seen nothing yet. If Brexit is betrayed, if 17.4 million people, including millions with absolutely nothing to lose, feel that they've been cheated out of that which they voted for, there's a real risk to social peace in this country. And the Queen doesn't have enough soldiers and we don't have enough police officers to deal with it.
Yeah.
Over to you.
Yeah. No, I'm sort of broadly along your train of thought with that, as it were. I have no sympathy generally for Anna Soubry. I think she is one of the worst Conservative politicians in terms of the fact that she constantly presents as this caring, concerned, trying to run a sort of central line, as it were, with
caring centrism.
Caring centrism she presents, and yet her voting record shows something completely differently. I think she's a snake in the grass because, don't forget, she's a lawyer, so she's trained to talk essentially bullshit all the time. I think she's a dangerous politician in terms of, like I say, because she presents as one thing when in reality she's actually another. I'm no fan of Owen Jones. I think a lot of the problems on the left are down to his kind of school of thought. This kind of democratic socialism presenting as radical is not helpful to anyone. However, nor do I sympathise with the people who abuse them in the street. It is unnecessary, and it's
totally counterproductive too.
No, it is. It doesn't achieve any. But and by the same way, I criticise the same people who go out on anti-fascist marches with their stomping boots, shouting the far right down. It's not achieving anything. All you're doing is taking an immovable object.
Well, it is ironic, isn't it? Because the pro-EU forces in Britain have been calling the rest of us Nazis for the last 2 years.
Well, exactly.
Because we wanted out of the EU.
And this is the thing. So it should not have happened. It's an ugly state of affairs. However, as you quite rightly pointed out, you have to look at the reasons how we've come to this place. Not least publications like the Daily Mail, who ran an opinion column from, I can't remember who it was, but the headline was "Why I Hate Jeremy Corbyn and His Nazi Stormtroopers," if you remember that.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's fine for the Daily Mail.
Mind you, that was actually written by a Labour candidate,
That's
Foster.
Right. Yeah. Yes, yes.
Multi-millionaire.
Yeah. That language is fine, obviously, because it's a Daily Mail.
Yeah.
And
it's about Corbyn.
Yeah, which is acceptable. He's a raving anti-Semite and a racist and a Nazi.
So you can scream that in Jeremy Corbyn's face, but you can't shout Nazi at Anna Soubry.
No, and nor can you have any context, as you say, how we've got to that point. Not least, as we've discussed on this programme before, the years of triangulated Blair, Clinton, PC, which abandoned working class communities, which then led to the abandonment of Labour, which then led to the rise of UKIP, which then led to the Brexit vote, which then led to the position we see ourselves in now, which politicians of all shapes and colours have to take responsibility for. That's in part what has led to this. But also there's the, again, underlying issue for me, which we see all the time, which is what this incident will now be used for. And it will now be used for an increased crackdown on legitimate demonstration and protest outside Parliament. You've already seen 50 MPs have written to Cressida Dick, head of the Met, saying they want her to sort the security and policing issues surrounding demonstrations and protests at Parliament. You know it will be used to crack down on left-wing protests that happen on a regular basis outside Parliament. I mean, ironically, we talked about this on my podcast, the drone incident in Gatwick. what I said on the podcast repeatedly is now coming true, that they're now bringing anti-drone laws where every drone over 250 grams has to be registered. That is people who use drone for activism and campaigning purposes, whether it be to monitor police, monitor corporations, make independent films. That's them now having to essentially register with the government for their use. And governments always do this.
Were there any drones, by the way, at the airport?
We still don't know, do we? No, I know. Apparently there couldn't be none at all. That happened while we were on our hiatus.
Exactly. The entire economy of Britain in the aviation sector ground to a halt because of repeated sightings of drones that may well have been police drones looking for other drones. And the airport had no defense mechanism against drones flying over the runways and potentially causing an aviation disaster. Yet they've got inside the airport hundreds of millions of pounds worth of security precautions. There are armed police everywhere. If only the terrorists knew that they could have brought the airports to their knees with a $12.99 drone out of Halford.
Exactly, it's ridiculous.
And by the way, while we were off, they dragged a totally innocent couple.
Oh yes,
unsuspecting, blinking into the light. Are these the morons who destroyed Christmas? Said the front page of the Daily Mail. To which the answer was no.
It was, yes. That story was fascinating last year, but. Back to Soubry and Jones debacle. I mean,
no, that it will, of course, lead to that. It will also be, they'll attempt to generate more angst about Brexit as a result. You see, these are the kind of people that support Brexit, although actually the Euro fanatics outside Parliament waving their EU flags, running after journalists, photobombing every television shot, and all that aggro has come from the pro-Remain people. But it will be used as a stick to beat Brexit with. But I repeat myself, it's a somber warning. The opposite inference is what should be drawn.
And that was, yes, and that's my kind of final point on this, if you like. I think you're correct in the implications for where we are headed with this, and I don't see anything on the landscape, in my opinion, that is going to be effective to counter this. I mean, you only have to look at the people behind these protests and the abuse that was thrown at Soubry and Jones. They're claiming to be the Yellow Vest movement in the UK, these people. Now, this is also a major concern. There's too much to go into for this segment now, but there's also a narrative to be had about what's going on with the attempts at the Yellow Vest movement in this country, because on the one hand, you've got this small group of far-right Tommy Robinson supporters claiming the mantle of being the Yellow Vest movement. Then by contrast, you've got People's Assembly on Saturday, 12th of January, who are going to be doing their own Yellow Vest movement. And for me, it's a damning...
Are they going to wear yellow vests?
Yes.
Oh, well, if they are, then that's good, because if you create a vacuum, other people will fill it. And if the left doesn't take to the streets in the kind of protests seen in France, minus one hopes violence and destruction, then the right wing will do it for you.
They
it's
will.
Kind of obvious.
It is, but it's People's Assembly, and my issue with that is that it's losing the whole. Why it worked in France was because it was spontaneous and ordinary people having the grievances. You have People's Assembly who, at the top of their organisational tree, have people in full-time jobs being paid to organise this shit. They then go and pay Westminster Council at least £20,000 for the privilege of marching, because I know, because I've seen their fucking books. And it just dissipates the whole point of the Yellow Vest movement. That's my concern. And it's a microcosm, I think, of the problem we have in Britain, that the whole notion of working class solidarity and working class organisation is completely lost. It's been co-opted out to either the far right or the middle classes, university educated, who take something like what's happening in France and make it into their own money-making scheme, essentially, because I'm afraid that's what People's Assembly is. They literally have people they pay. People are on an earner from People's Assembly, and the whole point of it is lost. And people are going for a jolly day out.
Yeah. Well, that would be unfortunate. I don't know anything about the People's Assembly. I've never been invited to it. I have no contact with it. I don't know who runs it. Don't know who these people are that are organising it. But of course I know the kind of thing to which you refer. And if Saturday is a demonstration of, you know, peaceniks and liberals, that will not capture the spirit at all of the Yellow Vest movement. Yeah. It'll be still worthwhile going, and I hope that people go to it. I won't be going myself. I only go if I'm allowed to speak at things, and I'm not allowed to speak at this. But I hope people go in significant numbers, because it will assist the worldwide, certainly European-wide movement that is going on now, to reject the prevailing orthodoxy, to reject austerity, reject neoliberalism, reject our governments, demand the démission, the dégagé of the leaders that we have. But the People's Assembly ain't going to storm the Bastille, that's for sure. You can't storm the Bastille, metaphorically speaking, unless the people from the estates, the working class, the real sans-culottes, unless they're on the demonstration, unless workers, unemployed workers, tenants, unless the mass of the people are on the streets, you ain't going to be overthrowing any government. Yep. But still, it's a worthwhile effort, and, you know, I wish it well.
I'm slightly more sceptical, and I don't wish it well, I'm afraid. I've been on one too many People's Assembly marches than I care to remember, and my patience has been lost with them, not least because on several marches there's numerous issues with disability access. They don't even give a thought to disabled people, and purely for the fact that we have had enough organised, paid A to B marches now, and it is merely, firstly, watering down the left and what it should be standing for and what we should be focusing on, and B, because it's so unrepresentative of actual working class people. They've organised fucking coaches, and it's people coming down from across the country for a nice jolly day out. They bring their packed lunches, they probably go to Pret a Manger afterwards. Or
no, you're getting mixed up with the Remain March.
They're all the fucking same, George. And the time is done for these kind of marches, and I find it insulting to the people of France that People's Assembly have co-opted the Yellow Vest movement, and I have no qualms about saying that on camera. I'm done with People's Assembly, and I'm very irritated.
Very interesting. I'll need to reflect on
I'm done.
What you said there.
$5.5 grand a week rent. 6 million in W8 for a, what is it? Oh, 5-bedroom. No, it's all right. It's not flat, at least. Buckingham Gate, SW1. That's ridiculous. 62.5 million. That is ridiculous, because in Suffolk, where my mum lives, I mean, it would still be ridiculous anyway, that would be about £1 million property, with probably about 10 acres as well. Yep. And this is when? Winter 2019. So this is in the same month that Shelter produced their report saying we need 3.1 million social homes. Yep. And we've even got recipes as well. Recipes, if you can afford. What's the fucking point in that? So if you can afford a £62.5 million home, why do you need recipes? You'd get your servants to cook for you, wouldn't you? You'd get your immigrant servants, which we won't obviously be having after the EU abandons us. Celeriac, I can't even pronounce that. What does that say? What is it? Celeriac, Parmigiano, so celeriac cheese. It's celeriac cheese and water with a bit of butter. Nice, lovely, sounds delicious. It's absolutely mind-boggling.
So they're actually going to wear yellow vests, are they?
Yeah.
I'm glad. I didn't think they would.
Just move it the other way.
Well, that would be quite a good picture. If you get, what, 20,000, 25?
It will be, yeah. But I can't hide my contempt for them, and the problem is as well. It's the most sort of It's the boldest display of controlled opposition there is, because literally all it is doing, and people are going on these kind of marches, having their nice little day out and thinking they've fucking done something and thinking they've actually made a difference, and they go back to their little lives and carry on as normal. As any self-respecting revolutionary socialist will know, the essential magazine titles that should be on your coffee table are, of course, The Morning Star, Red Pepper, and this, Dexter's London Property Professionals. Now, having a frantic finger through the pages of Dexter's this January, I stumbled across a property in Buckingham Gate, SW1, which is a classic white-fronted house directly opposite Buckingham Palace.
Not the palace up for sale.
Well, it's directly opposite Buckingham Palace, George, and adjacent to St James's Park. There are 8 bedrooms, a double-height glass atrium, courtyard garden, spa area with pool, sauna and gym. There's also staff accommodation, don't you know, ready for us to Brexit, a private garage and parking. This can all be yours for the measly, meagre price of 62.5 million quid.
Gone!
I'll have
62.5 million quid.
62.5 million pounds for a property in SW1. Now, as I say, it should be always along your copy of Red Pepper alongside that. Now, this is, of course, coming out at the same time as Shelter, the housing charity, produced their overarching report into the crisis in social housing in this country. It was a cross-party, drawn-up project which had the likes of Ed Miliband from one side and Baroness Varzi from another side coming together to work out a plan for the government for social housing and giving recommendations that the Conservative Party need to be implementing. The headlines, you will all have seen them because it was all over social media on Tuesday. Headlines are that we need to build 3.1 million social houses by, I think, 2030 to meet demand. There needs to be organised renters unions. There needs to be a new ombudsman like the Office for Budget Responsibility, who monitor what's going on with spending in social housing, and numerous other measures which Shelter is saying need to be implemented. Now, for me, while this is obviously welcome that a conversation is being had about social housing because it is one of the crises that is affecting this country and has affected this country for many years, for me the report didn't go far enough. It didn't address the fact, for starters, that the Conservative government have taken away housing associations' status as charities and put them back into the private sector, allowing them firstly to access private debt again so they can take on loads of loans to build a few properties, but also it takes various obligations away from housing associations. Nor did it do anything to address the fact that there is still a mismatch in the property market between what people can afford and what people are actually having to pay. And also for me it just buys into this notion, because a lot of the report was about how people are locked out of owning their own properties, and this obsession in this country with mortgages and with property as some sort of thing that is, it's like a pair of socks that we all should have, and if we don't have them then there's something wrong with us, needs to end. So for me the report wasn't radical enough, but that's me, so obviously it wasn't going to be.
Well, you're pretty radical. Like you, I come from a council house background. I lived in a slum with an outside toilet, sharing the outside toilet with 5 other families. And we got moved to a brand new council house with a bath, never mind an inside toilet. But there's only so much time you can spend in the bath. And if you are moved to a council estate where there is nothing else except houses with baths in them, then alienation and dissatisfaction, of course, soon grows, and the devil finds work for idle hands. So I'm the last to say that just building millions of council houses will be the answer to all our prayers, but it will be the answer to some of them. It will be the answer to the ultra-high rents in the private sector in many places, certainly including London. It will bring down houses for sale prices, because if there are more options to rent, there are fewer people chasing the properties that are available, and so the obscene escalation. Like you, I've looked at that, Dexter's. I'm sorry to tell you that that's not the most expensive house in the magazine. The most expensive is in Westminster, and it is £82 million. That is to say,
ridiculous.
In all but the very, very top weeks of the Euro Millions lottery, you would win the lottery and still not be able to buy one house. Yeah. Never mind do anything else, never mind giving any of it away or looking after your future. You couldn't buy one house in London, in Westminster, for a Euro Millions windfall. Now, of course, that's the extreme end of the market, but there's, in that very same magazine, a one-bedroomed flat in Angel, Islington, for £600,000. Pied à terre, don't you know, for £600,000. This is unsustainable because, of course, people can only afford to buy it by taking on monumental debt. The slightest dip in the economy will turn these kind of properties into subprime, and then you're on the brink of another 2008 collapse. So, of course, if you're looking at this holistically, it's not going to be solved just by building more roofs, but it cannot be solved without building those more new roofs. But I want to test you on something. You used the term social housing. I used the term council housing. Now, sadly, I am old enough to be able to say, I told you so. I was there when they started selling council houses, and I warned that it would lead exactly, ineluctably, where it has led. I was there when the left came up with the idea of housing associations. I denounced them, this is for the cognoscente, as Titoism at the time, a deviation from socialism that could only end in market economics and a return to capitalism. And again, that is exactly what has happened. These housing associations have taken the place of the council as your landlord, a democratic landlord that you can vote for and vote out if you're not happy. These housing associations began as public bodies, but inevitably they became less and less public, and now they're entirely private. And they've actually taken up the lion's share of social house building, such as there has been over these last 30 to 40 years. So I'm old-fashioned. I believe we need council houses.
And this is the crux of the matter, and I completely agree with you. This is my main issue with this, the fact that it is... You're right, because social housing just comes out of my mouth naturally, and it's because someone of my age, it's not called council housing, it's called social housing, and it just comes out of my mouth. And this is the crux of the problem. The report from Shelter mentions nothing about the fact that we should be moving towards council housing, where, as you quite rightly say, you can vote out your landlord if you don't like them. It does say, it talks about possible mutuals and co-op arrangements where people can invest in their own small community housing projects, if you like. It also talks about accountability of housing associations and how the ombudsman that should be created should monitor the standards of housing association and housing providers. But it still doesn't do anything to address, as you said, the fact that these are for-profit now companies. And to be honest, when they had charity status, if you dig deep enough, they were always for-profit anyway. They have subsidiaries, which money gets filtered in through, which is a profit-making entity. They always have been profit-making. It's just now in name they are private entities. And they're now openly about it, profit-making.
But let me give you a banal example. It's banal but telling. If you are in a council house and you've got 2 voters in your house and there's 8 or 10 voters in your building, and you go and see your councillor and you tell them that the repair to the building has not been done, or it's not been done well enough, or your repair in your house has not been attended to properly, the councillor has to jump to, kick ass, make sure it's done. Why? Because you have the power to sack him. You don't have that power over a housing association official, or a private landlord.
No, and then that's
the boot's on the other foot with the private
exactly.
landlord.
That is a crucial point in this as well. But I mean, also broadly, this report, it says 3.1 million. That is based on how many people will be coming into a situation which is considered dire enough that they will need social housing. It's their estimate on how many families and people will need, in terms of government rhetoric and government language of needs, what the parameters are for needing social housing, how many people will need it, not how many people would benefit from social housing who are currently stuck in the private rental sector.
Yeah, well, again,
and I have to say this, they're not stopping right to buy either. There's no recommendation to end right to buy in it.
Then it's pointless.
Is this going to solve? I mean, currently as it stands, I mean, the council house waiting list numbers have dropped. I remember when I first started writing about this in 2014, there was 1.8 million on council waiting lists. I think it's down to between 1 and 1.2 million now. So, but either way, there's still 1 million households, that's not people, households waiting for social housing in this country right now. 3 million over the next 15 years.
There's millions more that would benefit.
Exactly, and this is the point.
This definition of council housing, social housing, as a sink estate where you fall into when you fall through the bottom of every other market is a profound misconception.
Yes.
And it's a peculiarly British disease.
Yeah.
If you go to Paris, virtually nobody owns the house that they live. You go to Germany, virtually nobody owns the house in which they live. They rent them. Why should you tie up your whole life in the equity of a piece of masonry?
No, exactly.
Think of what you could do with your life.
Exactly. And it's a very British phenomenon, as you say, and it goes against, you'll know better than I do what Labour politicians said this, but when they created social council housing, the guy said something about the doctor and the midwife and the teacher and the worker all living on the same street, wasn't it?
Yeah. And that was the idea.
But it was Thatcherism, ultimately. It was that sort of neoliberal sort of Chicago town.
Well, I was there.
boys.
Thatcher introduced the right to buy. I was a Labour organiser at the time. I led our refusal to sell. We were taken to law by the Tory government, by Malcolm Rifkind. It's the first time, but not the last, I became his enemy. And they brought in a judge to hold an inquiry into our refusal to sell. The inquiry was mobbed and occupied by the troops, by us, and brought to a grinding halt. And eventually, only on pain of actually going to prison, did our councillors reluctantly agree to sell, and then made it as difficult as possible to sell. But you know what it's like? It's the same with, it's a dramatic comparison, but with the occupied territories in Israel, Palestine. Once they've been occupied for a long time, and once they've been paved and lit, and the swimming pools and the sprinklers and the gardens and so on are all in place, it's very difficult to go back to the status quo ante. And that's what's happened with the right to buy. So I'm not against people owning their own home, though I caution against it. But you can only aspire to own your own home or join the rat race in the private rented sector if there's no publicly available alternative. And mayor after mayor in London, I don't mean to be London-centric about this, but mayor after mayor in London, including Ken Livingstone, certainly Boris Johnson, and definitely Sadiq Khan, have completely failed, even with their own very limited programs and manifestos for 20% social housing in all new developments. 50% was Ken's aspiration. Never remotely came near 50. Johnson's was, I think, 20 or 25. Never remotely near it. Khan's was 10. Not remotely near it. So that every new development that is being built on precious, scarce land is overwhelmingly for the richest people in London, or the most indebted people in London. Because let's not forget what the word mortgage means in French. It means the grip of death. That was good.
Yeah, that was good. You pretty much filled up the show with,
Have we?
Yeah.
This was 15 minutes.
Oh, well, don't segue into Saudi.
We're out of touch, obviously. Or we feel like we have a lot to say.
So, is it okay?
I think so, if Steve does.
Yeah, I
think it was good.
Yeah, because we went
That was interesting, meaty. The People's Assembly stuff will grab a lot of attention.
We'll be this Saturday though, yeah?
Yeah. We didn't say goodbye.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah, I'll do that. Well, that's all the time we've got for the first edition of Topple Galloway, first edition of 2019. Many more, I hope, to come. A Happy New Year to you, Steve, and I mean that sincerely, not in the Reverend I Am Jolly way I did at the beginning.
Yes, and to you too. And don't forget, everyone, if you want to get involved, you can tweet us using the hashtag Topple Galloway, and it's at Mr. Topple, at George Galloway, and also we'll be in Neath.
On stage.
Yes, treading the boards. Frankly, I haven't done that since I was 16. What was the last show I was in? I played Jesus in Godspell.
I've no doubt.
No, I did.
I would expect no less.
I was Jesus in God. That's the last time I walked on a theatre stage. So this will be a somewhat yes. I'm thinking of how.
It's a great opening line.
That.
That's
it could be. Yes. Last time I was on stage, I was Jesus.
Now he's John the Baptist. Well, I am going to appear with Jesus at the Gwyn Hall in Neath, and you can get the tickets online from the hall. It's going to be great.
Yes, excellent. No, it really was the last time I was on stage.
No, that is a good line.
Can I just film you looking at that page?
I mean,
So I can have a clue. So people at home can see what you're talking about. This is it.
That'll shock people, actually.
Mm. Yeah.
And the irony is, of course, that you're almost certainly going to be a foreigner if you're going to be able to buy that.
Yeah, ain't gonna be no British people.
There's no British people going to be able to live opposite the Queen. You've got to be Johnny Foreigner
exactly.
from the former empire. Mm-hmm. Just one more thing. The three countries in the world most keen on interfering in every other country's business are the United States, Britain, and France. And these are the very three countries in the world that are now, at this moment, essentially ungoverned. The White House and the United States Congress are at war, and the US government has shut down. Donald Trump is being openly defied by his generals and his security staff around him. President Macron is besieged in the Élysée Palace in a way that it could be the Bastille about to be stormed. Hundreds of thousands of French men and women are week after week on the streets demanding that he go. And here in London, the Prime Minister is a dead woman walking. 80 days to go. We have no idea where it is we're actually going. Ironic, isn't it? These people that want to run the world can't even run their own countries.
Just one more thing. January 2019, remember this month, because under the guise of Brexit and hidden from our view, moves were afoot in Africa from the US. Not least because in the wake of elections and the subsequent protests in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the US sent forces into the country of Gabon to monitor the developing situation in this neighbouring state. However, of course, this was not the full story, because what happened in Gabon next? There was an attempted coup by the military, oddly enough, which was suddenly quashed. Now, why is this important? Well, if you look what's happening in the Middle East, the US has withdrawn from Syria, there's fault lines still existing, but mark my words, I think that Africa is going to be the next frontier in the Western imperialist war. You have Central African Republic, Democratic Republic of Congo, huge exporters of minerals like copper and coltan, which are essential for mobile phones. You have Gabon, which is the 5th largest oil-producing country in sub-Saharan Sub-Saharan Africa, who they are desperately trying to keep control of in the face of military uprisings. Africa is going to be the new Middle East in the forthcoming years, and trust me, it starts here.